We are going to jump to item 13, and we will come back to 12. But item 13 is a briefing on transit safety and security. We are going to be joined by our central staffer, Greg Doss, our Major Dave Jutila from the Metro Transit Police, and I think maybe for his last presentation to the council, our general manager of Metro Transit. It's always good to see him, Kevin Desmond. So welcome, Kevin. Good to have you here. We'll turn to Greg on this. Obviously, I think transit safety and security for both our drivers, our coach operators, and our passengers is a high concern and a top priority for everybody here at King County. Metro, I think, runs a very safe system, but we're always looking to make it safer. And we've had some tremendous success starting in 2008 and 9 when we implemented a plan to improve safety and deployed our transit police, and we saw the positive results come from that with the numbers of assaults seriously decline as a result of that work. And I think there is interest. I've introduced a motion asking for kind of a comprehensive plan looking at further expansion of cameras, additional investments in the transit police, as well as additional comprehensive efforts with respect to prosecutors and public defenders to see if we can build on the gains that have been made in recent years because of our safety and security program. I would ask our central staffer, Mr. Doss, to give a brief introduction to this item, and then we'll turn it over to Mr. Desmond and Major Jutila to go in whichever order you'd like. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Greg Doss, Central Staff, here to introduce briefing number 2016 B0046. As you mentioned, this will be on transit safety and security. To my left are Major Dave Jutila from the Metro Transit Police and Rob Gannon, the Deputy General Manager of Metro Transit.
Kevin Desmond.
I'm sorry, Kevin Desmond.
Filling in for Rob.
Thanks. Filling in for Rod. I was reading the agenda. Apologize for that.
Thank you for
Apologize
coming.
for that.
Would you hurry?
So the purpose of today's briefing on transit safety and security is to cover the recent developments in transit safety and to have the department speak to their efforts to make sure that they are maintaining a safe system. The reason for today's briefing is a motion that was introduced by the chair last week that would require, as you say, Mr. Chair, a comprehensive plan to be submitted by the executive on transit safety and security. And in reading from that motion, which is motion number 2016-0134.1, the motion would request a security action plan that supports the strategies outlined in the system security plan and identifies and prioritizes specific activities that can be undertaken to enhance the safety and security of Metro Transit's customers and employees. This plan would include information about current security plans and programs that are being implemented. It would include an analysis about the reliability and potential expansion of video cameras on transit coaches and the potential use of cameras by operators for security purposes, an analysis of fair enforcement policies and practices and the relationship between these policies to operator safety and passenger security. It would include an analysis of current staffing levels for Metro Transit Police, an analysis of the potential benefits that could be derived from Metro Transit Police and security personnel deployment based on real-time crime reporting, an analysis of how dedicated personnel in the prosecuting attorney's office and Department of Public Defense might further transit safety, and an analysis of how transit safety programs can be implemented so as to avoid disparate impacts on disadvantaged communities. Finally, this would require a potential budget action plan and recommendations for funding sources that might be included in the 2017-2018 proposed biennial budget. So with that as an overview of the motion and today's briefing topic, I would go ahead and turn it over to Kevin.
Very good. Thank you very much for that overview, Greg, and welcome back. Welcome, Kevin.
Good morning. Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. And Mr. Gannon had another obligation, so he asked me to sub for him. So one last shot at me here at the council. But I'm more than happy to be here with Major Jutila and talk about our security and safety programs. Safety and security is number one. It's the number one job for any transit agency anywhere in the world, for that matter. So that is our number one priority. That priority is reflected in Metro's strategic plan. Making the system safe and safer, you just mentioned, Mr. Chair, making it safer is a core business driver that we've adopted as a senior leadership team within Metro, and that does drive our operations, that does drive and will drive our budget as well. The Metro Transit Police, Major Jutila is our police chief, are fully integrated into Metro Transit's operations. Major Jutila is a member of Metro's leadership team. And as such, we at our leadership team on a routine basis closely monitor our key security and safety for that matter, but our key security performance indicators, as well as keeping in touch with rider satisfaction, customer satisfaction survey data associated with people, how our customers perceive their safety and security in the system. You'll see some of Dave's key performance measures in the upcoming slides. The Metro Transit Police work in very close collaborations, in particular with our operations section. Operations section, of course, is the heart and soul of Metro. It's where all of our operators and field personnel work. That collaboration extends to the Amalgamated Transit Union, and of course with our operators. We have base security committees that the Metro Transit Police routinely participate. That's where we talk about tactics. That's where we talk about hotspots in the system. That's where we talk about operator training needs. In fact, our program is based on engineering, enforcement, and education. So the tools in all three of those areas apply in our security program going forward, and you'll hear a little bit about that in a moment when Dave starts his slides. We're planning a security summit with the ATU and our workforce in the coming weeks to further dig into issues particularly associated with operator assaults, but not just operator assaults. It's important to note that the Metro Transit Police work in very close collaboration with other jurisdictions, whether it's cities throughout King County, the FBI, the Joint Terrorism Task Force, and other entities. So we are plugged in. We've made very good progress on the camera system on the coaches. We'll talk about that shortly. Last week, the Executive Constantine, announced his direction to us to accelerate moving to 100% of cameras on the system as soon as we can get that done. We'll talk a little bit about that more in the slides. Transit security is a national topic. It's a topic throughout North America's point of fact. So the issues that we face here in our bus system and the rail system for Sound Transit are not unique to Seattle or the King County area at all. We think we operate a very good, safe, and secure system, thanks in large part to our Metro Transit Police, but it is an issue of national concern. So much so that the United States Congress has directed the Federal Transit Administration to provide a report in the fall on comprehensive actions that can be taken to address operator assaults throughout the United States. So we will look forward to that report. No doubt one of the things they'll be talking about is it remains kind of a hot topic in our industry are shields for operators on buses. Shields are kind of a controversial issue in North America. They have not really been adopted in very many properties at all. We've tested them actually a couple of times over the last number of years, working closely with our operators, and at the end of the day, they didn't like the shields for a variety of reasons. That said, from an engineering standpoint, the interest remains. Europe has introduced some shields with at least some success. So I think we're looking for a standard from that standpoint from the federal government and the manufacturers.
And
coming
Kevin,
forward.
if I can, just so everyone's on the same page, when you talk about shields, you're talking about further enclosing the coach around the driver.
So in the driver compartment, as you get on a bus, as you know, the driver and their customers, there is a face-to-face human contact that's possible. So the extent to which a good shield that is safe, that provides the type of access that does not create other glare or visual impairments, which is a different challenge that operators have, that could reduce some of the assaults, particularly things like spit and run, I think we call it. You know, there's a lot of spitting kinds of, unfortunately, that is an assault. and some of the other contacts. So, shields, are they coming to North America with the manufacturers remains to be seen. We need to find one that ultimately works for the operators. At the end of it, we've told the ATU and our operators, if we find a shield that they like, we would move forward with that, but we have not yet found that at this point in time. Operator assaults are in the news. There was some news last week. There was a lot of news coverage over an assault out in the Auburn area, and fortunately, we caught the bad guy. And you might hear a little bit about that. There was an uptick in January, a very surprising uptick in the number of assaults in January. In February, we're back to quote unquote the norm. There should be 0 assaults. It is simply not acceptable that anyone would assault one of our fine transit operators. And it is frankly, from my perspective, just outrageous that anyone would, whether it's spitting on an operator all the way to physical contact. Fortunately, none of the assaults so far this year are aggravated assaults. Dave can talk about the difference. No assault is a good assault. Certainly the fact that none of them are aggravated assaults at least suggests that nobody is being injured. As the chair pointed out, we've cut the number of assaults in half over the last number of years through our operator assault reduction program. And through the excellent work of the Metro Transit Police, we make a number of arrests. So if somebody assaults our operators, we will catch you and we will arrest you. And I think, listeners should know that, and they've done a very good job. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Major Jutila to walk through the slides, and we, of course, will entertain all of your questions and dialogue here this morning.
Very good. Thank you very much, Kevin, for that presentation. And if members don't mind, let's hold questions till we get through Major Jutila's
Thank you, Kevin. I
presentation.
appreciate it. Council members, I appreciate being here this morning and giving you a brief overview of the efforts of your Metro Transit Police in improving security on the transit system. So I'm going to go through a series of slides here. Fair amount of information. One of the things I wanted to just paint as far as some cornerstone activities for the Metro Transit Police is we really focus on prevention, problem solving, and partnerships. Those are really key cornerstones that we have. With regards to our bus security program, we look at it in the context of an enhancement to local law enforcement, above and beyond typically what local law enforcement would be able to provide to the Metro Transit system. We have focused efforts. We need to have our deputies spending time on the system at various routes and locations, focusing on crimes, focusing on quality of life issues, and code of conduct issues. Again, we try to gather information from throughout the system, so we are event-driven. A lot of the information, as Kevin mentioned, is generated through the security reports from the bus drivers, going to the base committees and hearing from them what they have to say. Also from our partners in local law enforcement, the crime information that they share with us. We also have another element for our program, and that's a geographic deployment to try to cover as much of the system with our transit deputies as possible, because we want to be responsive to the bus drivers and the customers out in the field who are on buses who may have a problem. So we want to be able to respond to those. Again, an element of the top route of the more problematic routes that the bus drivers help us identify through their security incident reports. And then, as Kevin also mentioned, an element of accountability through education for customers. Sometimes it means civil infractions. Sometimes it means criminal citations and or arrest. But holding people accountable for bad behavior. And then we also have a tool that we use, and that is the suspension and exclusion tool. If we identify people that are causing problems on our transit system, to prohibit their use of the system for a certain amount of time based on what their offense is. There's also, again, focusing on the problem routes, zones, and transit-centered. We use an element of uniformed deputies, plainclothes deputies, coach ride teams to work on those top routes. And then the other piece we have to make sure that we provide for Metro Transit customers and employees is a very visible presence, highly visible, so that we are out there providing a crime prevention component, which is really important for us. The next slide I wanted to share with you really has to do with a couple of performance metrics for the Metro Transit Police. The first one on the very top is dispatch calls for service. This, in essence, is responding to 911 related calls on the bus system. Every Metro bus has an emergency alarm, a priority request to talk, a radio component where the bus driver can ask for help. And we at the Metro Transit Police want to be as responsive as possible. This is an indicator. We typically have 350 to 400 dispatch calls for service to where we're able to respond and help the bus driver, help customers with problems on those buses. The next graph up here is just really the element of a law enforcement term as far as on-view activity. It just means being proactive police work. Our deputies want to provide a felt presence for the transit system, to be out there and to be seen, be visible. And this is an indicator of our deputies being out in the field and having interaction with the 400,000 customers a day and the 2,500 bus operators that are providing service out there.
Major Jutila, can I ask you a question on these slides? I mean, obviously, everyone is looking at the graph here, and we see a jump in mid-2013, frankly, almost a doubling, right, from the historic trend, at least as shown there, to the period from 2014, 2015, kind of in both, at least on the top one, it's a doubling. What's driving that?
The driver on that was really policy decision, feedback from our customers at Metro, discussions amongst the transit deputies. There was a certain period of time that there was an emphasis-driven model, and it wasn't as responsive to Metro Transit as it could have been or should have been. We looked at and sat down with our customer as how can we be more responsive, how can we be more visible to you. So we basically sat down with our transit deputies and said, this is important to our customer. We have to change our tactics. We are going to make a policy decision to go back to our geographic deployment to be as responsive to Metro as possible. So that was basically driven by a lot of good work, a lot of hard work by your transit deputies to be out there and visible and responsive to the bus system.
And so when you talk about going back to the geographic model, you're talking about your south, central, and north operational areas?
Yes, it was. Yeah, that was a key change and a key component for us.
And what has been the results with respect to reduction in on-board activities? Has it been successful?
Good question. Let me go to the next slide and talk about that.
Councilmember Balducci, I have a question before you jump to that.
Before we move on to the next slide, sorry, Chief. The reported calls are measured in the hundreds. Can you go back to the last one? Last slide.
Backup point, there we go.
Yeah, the reported calls are measured in the hundreds. The on-views are measured in the thousands. What's going on there? Are you seeing different things? Is there a different threshold? Like if an officer sees something, it might be minor, but it's reported, it gets counted, whereas people will pick up the phone and call 911 only when it's serious. What's happening that there's such a magnitude of difference between those?
The threshold for us is, number one, is most of our dispatch calls for service come from the bus operators. They can also come from customers who may call 911 on a cell phone that may go to one of the other PSAPs, and we would get routed to those types of things. So our dispatch calls for service are not as high as they could be. Our goal is to ask for Metro to be asking for our help so we can respond. So that's one. The other element there is the proactive on-view piece. And so we ask our deputies to be boarding the Metro coaches, to be doing more coach rides, more visible presence at the transit centers. So as they do those things, most of the time, it doesn't result in an enforcement action. Most of the time, it results in being out there, being available, answering questions for customers or bus operators. Our enforcement activity averages probably 180 to 200 enforcement actions a month, which would be infractions, civil citations, and arrests. So it's separate information, much more detailed, much more granular if we wanted to break those things out.
Maybe we could follow up after, because that didn't really answer the question for me. So, but I don't want to take up time.
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Cole-Wells.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As a daily rider on Metro Transit, I've seen many times where somebody is kind of hanging around when people are getting on the bus, and they seem a bit threatening, potentially threatening. What do you instruct the drivers to do in that case where there's a potential threat?
I think that the reality is for the bus operators, they're given protocols on if it's a low level, a medium level, or a high level, as far as what they could and should do as far as calling for assistance. Those are protocols that are built within the operations of Metro. And if they, identify something in their mind that causes them concern for their safety or the safety of customers, for them to call, it goes to the Transit Control Center, and then the call comes to the sheriff's.
And I understand that in general, but I'm talking about when there's somebody outside of the bus.
When there's somebody
and
outside of the bus,
They may or may not get on the bus.
if they see something that causes them concern, they have the latitude of calling into the Transit Control Center to get that generated. In addition to that, if other customers feel that there's a concern from, potential criminal behavior or erratic behavior, we encourage all of our citizens to call 911. And if that call goes to one of the local law enforcement agencies, it is triaged and typically routed to the Sheriff's
Okay,
Department 911.
so maybe I'm not being specific enough, but I'm talking about in an immediate situation, and the people are getting on the bus, and someone comes up acting very erratically or potentially.
They would
Right.
typically have.
I mean, do the operators ever just close the doors to people who might cause a threat? I mean, I can see where it could be a difficult situation, but if you call 911, I mean, that can take a lot of time.
Yes. And again, those are all difficult situations. The bus drivers make the best decisions possible to protect themselves and to protect the rest of the customers.
Okay, thank you.
Major Gentile, if I could follow up on that, and Councilmember Cole Wells represents a good part of downtown Seattle and the core here. Maybe talk a little bit about your bicycle unit and how that works with respect to safety and security in our urban part of the system.
Certainly. Thank you for bringing that up. We do have a bicycle enforcement emphasis squad. We commonly refer to them as the Bees. And they spend a lot of time in the downtown corridor on 3rd Avenue, in and around the downtown Seattle Transit Tunnel, doing a lot of proactive patrols in the high-density corridors. So again, a heavy visible presence from them. They are very mobile, very moving around, and very engaged with the bus operators and very engaged with the customers in the CBD.
And may I
Oh, absolutely.
continue? So would the process be that there's a situation develops before the bus leaves the place where people are boarding? Are they able to contact the riders, the bicycle riders, officers? Or do they have to go through the dispatch and then all of that?
If the transit deputies get there before the bus moves on, they're able to have some brief dialogue with the customers and find out, what
No,
other situations.
I asked if how does the operator communicate to the bike?
They would typically do it through the Transit Control Center, through their radio system, and it would be passed on that way. Also, if there's just simultaneously transit deputies there, it's not uncommon for them to open up a door or a window and just verbally communicate.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr.
I
Desmond.
just want to go back to Councilwoman Balducci's question, because I think maybe I can help and Dave can explain further. The difference between the two graphics, the one on top, the calls for service or reaction. So they're reacting to a call, and it's an individual event. The on-views are really more proactive. So those are individual touch points from the deputies out in the system. So there are two ways that Major Jutil and the team can identify, and we can identify with them, the sort of the quantity of what they're doing out in the field, is separate and apart from arrests, and you'll see in the next graphic, actual people doing bad things. So I think reactive, proactive, you add them together, that gives a sense of what's going on in the field.
I want to be clear. I understand what reactive is. I understand what proactive is. I don't know why there'd be 10 times more proactive than reactive. That's what I don't understand. And I don't want to I really don't want to take the committee's time with it, because it's kind of just a curiosity question. It doesn't really affect what we're talking about here today, which I'd like you to be able to do.
Certainly.
Thanks.
Certainly. The next slide that I just wanted to talk briefly about really has to do with a key performance indicator for us, and that is issues and problems on the bus between passengers. And so one of the rating categories we have here, a key performance indicator, is passenger assaults. And then the second one is physical disturbance that happen and occur between passengers on the bus. One of the things that we clearly identified back in 2008 and 2009 is we did not always have clear data from the bus operators and what was expected of them to have a belief in their mind of what they saw on the bus while they're their intent is to drive the bus. So we really had to hone in on making sure that those were clearly criminal assaults that happened and occurred. If we identified that it wasn't a criminal assault, we would typically be able to identify that it was a physical altercation of some capacity or something altogether differently. But as we have identified here, this is typically lower volumes based on the bus operators' observations and the security incident reports that they generate on passenger criminal assaults on the bus.
And
The
if I
other
can,
element-
Major, just to scale this, we have over 400,000 boardings a day in the system, right?
Yes.
And it's a little hard to see on some of this, but with respect to the assaults, it looks like we're under kind of 5 a month on
Yes.
average. And with respect to the disturbances, we're at about 30 a month, so 1 a day.
Yeah.
Out of 400,000 plus boardings. So this is rare from a system-wide perspective, though serious.
And to put it in even more context, is taking each one of these, and we've looked at a 48-month period to look at an average for the passenger assaults, and we basically have identified that there's 0.37 passenger assaults per 1 million boardings. And that's the probability of a situation like that happening.
And do you know how that compares to peer agencies? Any sense?
At this moment in time, I don't have
It's
to
one
do
of the
the
things I think
research
the
on it.
legislation suggests we look at, but
Yeah, we saw that in your legislation. That's something we'll have to consider. The problem with national data, we run into this in other areas, safety, collisions and so forth, somewhat similar, is different jurisdictions will measure things and define things differently. So getting to a common, really good indicator where you're comparing apples to apples is a little difficult. But I think in the association that Major Jutila works with throughout, I think, 22 different cities throughout North America, transit agencies, transit police forces, we can try to get some of that information, try to get comparable information.
thank you.
And then just also to put the passenger physical disturbance in context is, if you look at that per 1 million boardings, there's a situation of 2.18 or per 1 million boardings that may happen across the transit system if you look at a 4-year average. So that's the context that we really wanted to frame this within. The next thing that I'd like to talk about is really the elements of our operator assault reduction program. Back in 2008, 2009, I had a general manager who challenged me as his new chief of police to say, what things can be done to reduce operator assaults for our transit system? And it was a challenge. It was a real good challenge. And we went back to some basics with our team using a SARA model of scanning, analyzing, being responsive, and then assessing what the activities were on that. And we identified a number of things that we needed to work on better with our partners in law enforcement and at Metro Transit. Number one, quick deputy responses to any and all reports of operator assaults. It is very important for us to be there to respond to those bus operators when they hit their emergency alarm. You saw a picture of that last week in Auburn when one of the transit operators was hit in the face by a customer. He fled the scene, was basically identified through the help of service quality from Metro. He pulled a knife on one of our transit deputies and fled from the scene. We were able to get the helicopter in there to get him identified where he was at, and we were able to get him safely taken into custody and arrested and held accountable so we can also get him off the system so he doesn't do that again. Number two is really the element of relentless follow-up investigations by our detectives. We had pretty good success last year with a total of 26 arrests. Our detectives do everything they can to identify the person responsible, work with local law enforcement, or say, please turn that over to us and we'll investigate it. The tool of the camera coaches has been phenomenal. It's been an excellent tool for our transit detectives. Communication outreach with our customers, letting all of our customers know that touching a bus operator is a serious crime. Don't do it. It's a Class C felony. We have pushed that message out. We have this poster on each of the coaches throughout the transit system. Another important component was working with dedicated people at Metro Training to develop and deliver a diffusing hostile situations class. You got to picture every time, every day, there's 400,000 opportunities for a little bit of conflict to happen, and giving extra tools for the bus operators to diffuse those situations has been phenomenal. Early intervention for operators, if we identified an operator who perhaps needed some extra training, we were very proactive in that. EMPHAS patrols by your transit deputies and your plainclothes detectives out across the system. Again, the use of our suspension and exclusion policy. There's some work that's being done on that now as far as evaluating it for equity and social justice and making sure that there's accessibility for appeals. But certainly it's been a good tool. The use of the Operator Assault Reward Fund. ATU has basically said we will support rewards for any people that help assist in an operator assault or good witnesses. So that's been a good component with and partnership with the union. Legislative efforts that have happened in the past with the Code of Conduct and also at the state level. Our state is not all states across the country have assaulting a bus operator as a felony, but it is in the state of Washington. They're just now working on that in the Cincinnati, Ohio area. And then lastly, is there's some ongoing efforts that are taking place now with the early warning system for things that are happening out in the field, and that's largely driven by Metro operations. I put here on the bottom is, again, as Kevin mentioned, it's a national trend across the country. I learn a lot from my transit peer chiefs across the country. I've presented on our strategies at a national conference. I've learned a lot from what they have done and different things, but I'm able to key into Dallas, to Portland, Los Angeles, Minneapolis, Atlanta, Chicago, Washington, D.C., Denver, Philadelphia, and Boston as far as committed, dedicated transit police agencies to learn what they're doing, and we share with them what we're doing.
Major, Councilmember Lambert has a question.
Thank you so much. I was just thinking back to when I had little kids in my very own van, and they were all yelling and screaming and playing, and how hard it was to concentrate. I can't imagine having a 90-passenger bus behind me and all doing what they're doing and trying to concentrate. Could you tell me how I could find a copy of the Code of Conduct?
I will get that to you. It's basically on the website for Metro Transit, under the
Okay.
Metro Transit Police, where I can get you a copy of it.
I'll just pull it up. Thanks.
All right. Go ahead, Major.
So with all those things that we've done, number one is I just got to back up and say, take a pause. There's been a lot of commitment from people at Metro operations that have made a significant difference. Now you can see an arrow up here is when we instituted this problem-solving project to reduce operator assaults. They came down pretty quickly as we paid attention to this, which was very, very important. My position on it is, as those operator assaults were reducing, is, great job for a lot of people contributing to this, but we're never going to declare victory. That's the bottom line. Our position is there should not be any bus operator assaults. We had a big uptick that caused a lot of concern for all of us here in this room and beyond this room for the month of January. It was a phenomenon that caused me a lot of concern and others as well. We're working through that now. We are conducting those investigations, but I'm pleased to share with you that as the month of February closed last night at midnight, we had a total of only 5 operator assaults. That's 5 too many, but it's significantly less than what happened and occurred during the month of January. To put this in context, again, as far as the volume of our operator assaults, most of them are at the misdemeanor level, not a felony level where it's done with a weapon or there's serious injury to a bus operator. Thank goodness. The misdemeanor assaults, again, they're terrible. They should never happen to any of our bus operators out in the field. Whether it's a hit, a push, a scratch, something like that, or a spit, it should never happen. Putting it in context as far as the Metro system, over a 48-month average, per 1 million boardings, there's about a potential of 0.78 per 1 million boardings across the system. So again, a lot of interaction, a lot of opportunities for good interactions with the bus operators and sometimes challenges.
If I can, Major, on this slide, we've kind of, if you were to mean it out, we've kind of held steady, if you will, from 2010 to 2015 with respect to the assaults on operators and passengers. During that time, we had the Great Recession, and Metro's finances were very squeezed, and I know it was tough to hold on, and so additional investment of resources in your work was probably limited. My question to you is, do you believe we can take the next step forward and have a serious additional decline in operator and passenger assaults with additional investment of technology and resources in terms of deputies and cameras, for example?
I appreciate that question. I think that anything and everything that can continue to be done in the future is important, and I think it is a goal, an important goal for Metro to set, to continue to reduce the bus operator assaults.
Let me just follow up, though. If we are asked to make an additional investment of transit dollars, which in security and safety measures, do you believe that that investment will yield the kind of results we saw, say, when we made the investment in 2008?
I think there's all the potential in the world. The services that we provide from the Sheriff's Department are really driven by our customers. And so with the question that is being asked, really it's our customers at Metro that would be identifying what additional resources would be brought to bear to reduce these assaults further.
Kevin, do you have thoughts on that?
Yes. I think it goes back to what I said in the opening. It's, that graphic was not the result of investments per se, with one exception. That's the camera system, which is the next slide, because the cameras really started to come into the system around that time. But I think the real downward slope was the combination of enforcement, engineering, and education. So that shared intelligence between the operators in the field and our management group, in particular the Metro Transit Police, on tactics, really, really very important. The operator training is super important. Can't minimize that in ways to diffuse aggressive situations in the field. I mean, we have operators who have been, longtime operators in the core urban areas on routes that otherwise have a tendency towards higher crime and disorder, and they don't get assaulted. So some of it is training the operators, but a lot of it is the surveillance through the cameras and really good tactics from the police. And I think continued public education as well. Getting back to it's outrageous, we shouldn't accept it, we need to arrest these people, and then they have to bear the consequences as well. It is all of a piece. So I think there's the totality of it will help continue to get those numbers down. Investments, everybody could use more cops. There's no question about that. I don't think there's a community in King County that would not say they could use more police officers. So how you balance the need for investments with the other features of the package, I think, is the conversation to have.
Very good. Thank you. All right, let's finish
Which gets
up
us to
on
the
this.
next slide. So
Yes.
I'll start off this next slide, speaking of investment. So we started installing the camera system several years ago. The first system was an early technology, didn't work too well. And then in the latter part of last decades, we nailed it with the best available technology. Right now, we have about 44% of Metro's fleet has camera systems. The first camera systems were, in fact, financed by Homeland Security grants, and we've increasingly just been using our own budget. That 44% is about 600 or so of Metro's buses. Add to that about 60 or 70 Sound Transit coaches also have cameras in the system. All of the new electric trolley buses in Seattle, the purple buses, will have cameras. Very, very few of the electric trolley buses had cameras before. All of the next generation of articulated coaches, which are just now hitting the system, the 20 rapid ride coaches for the C and the D line in a few weeks, and then another 95 coaches that we bought very quickly off of a contract in the state of Oregon. All of those will have cameras as well. So by 2017, sometime in 2017, when all of those buses are finally in the system, Metro will have well over 800 coaches. So getting close to 55% of the system will have camera coaches at that time, which we will be able to a certain degree, deploy strategically within the system to areas in the county that tend to have more disturbances on the buses. Last week, the executive asked us to accelerate the program to get to 100%. So we're going to get there as fast as we can. There's two kind of groupings of buses that we have to think about. A little over 400 of the coaches that we have today that do not have camera systems came pre-wired. So we anticipated in the procurement future just installing the cameras and the digital video recorders. on the buses. So they are relatively easy to retrofit. So we can move with that relatively quickly. We need some budget just to buy the equipment. We also need some budget and a little bit of a technology program for remote downloading of the video. We do that by one individual actually does that now. He actually has to go to the DVRs and pull the recording. So we still have a little bit of a technology issue. But we think we can get all of those coaches with cameras within 2 years, maybe sooner. The executive has asked us to double down to do it as fast as we possibly can, and we will be submitting a budget request to make that happen. A little over 300 of additional buses are our oldest fleet. They are not pre-wired. Those buses will be retired in the next 2 to 4 years. It makes no economic sense at all to try to outfit those with cameras. We would simply just specify that all of those, the replacement coaches will come in with the camera systems on them, just as the trolleys are coming now. We would expect with that fleet should be turned over around 2020. So for the fleet that's pre-wired, a couple of years, 2.5 years or so, I think is doable. Again, the execs asked us to do it as fast as possible, so we're doing some work around that. And then the residual old fleet, probably by 2020, we should be able to be 100%. The justification for cameras on the coaches from a pure cost-benefit analysis, very strong cost-benefit ratio simply on risk claims, accident claims. We've worked very closely with Jennifer Hills and her group. We net save money by having the camera systems on our coaches as we investigate accidents.
She said, well,
Exactly, yes. So we're able to deny a lot of claims, frankly. The added piece that Major Jutila, and he'll speak to in a second, it absolutely improves the security on the system. So it's a double whammy, and getting to 100%, I think, is an important initiative going forward. Dave can add in terms of his perspective on how they use the camera system of the police.
And I just want to start by, as I have gone out to the base security committees and the bus drivers have talked to us, anecdotally, many have shared that when I'm driving a camera coach, it seems as if it's just a little bit calmer and there's just a little bit less of a chance or an opportunity for something to flare up. And that's because most people adhere. They see the cameras on the coaches. They see the stickers on the sides of the coach and inside, indicating that that there could be on video and audio. That's one element. Number two is we believe that that is also feeds into a deterrent for people that are perhaps contemplating doing something bad or inappropriate or criminal on a Metro bus. And to hold them accountable ahead of time as that element of a deterrent. The response piece is if there is a crime on a transit bus, for us to be able to use that information, to use those images, those digital images, for a forensics identification of the person who did it. And our transit deputies are able to put bulletins together to share with other professionals in law enforcement and to be able to use those images to clearly identify who the person is and was and what the actions were at the time to hold them accountable. So it's been very, very optimal for us. So.
Can I ask a question on cameras? I think it was August of 2013, we had a driver shot in downtown. I went up to Harborview Hospital that day to see the family and then the head of ATU who was there. It was very traumatic for all of our operators and passengers. That coach, as I recall, had a camera but was deemed to be or determined later to be inoperable. How are we doing with respect to the deployed cameras and their operability? Are we fixing those? What is our current status?
So that was that incident, which of course was very traumatic, and there were actually two coaches. There was the coach where the shooting, the first shooting happened, and the second coach where the assailant went to the coach, and that's where he met his end. Unfortunately, both those coaches, the camera systems were not recording. We couldn't get visuals back. It's actually not the cameras. The cameras are extremely reliable. It's the DVR. The DVR, a lot of shaking, things happen in the bus. At that time, we took a look, about 80% of the camera systems were functioning at any given time. 80% decent number, not good enough. We did an after-action report. We actually had to add staff, electronic technicians. In vehicle maintenance, we're now at about as of yesterday, we're at 93%, which is good. And it's getting to 100%, probably impossible, at least with the current technology, with all the shaking and the jiggling and the things that can happen. When we get a remote monitoring of the system that I referred to before, which helps with the retrieval of the data itself, it also gives you a diagnostic on the system. So that should be able to improve vehicle maintenance's ability to get to buses where the systems are not fully operational more quickly. Getting to 100%, probably not realistic. Getting above 93%, possible.
Very good. All right, thank you. All right, this has been an excellent, thorough, and detailed briefing. We really appreciate it. Is there any questions or comments before we close this out from members? No? All right, at our next meeting on the 15th, we'll take up the motion. I encourage members to take a look at it and see if they have thoughts or comments or suggestions to improve it. And I ask, of course, for input from Major Jutila. Your review and the Transit Division would be appreciated. We want to work in partnership to give you the support you need. And so when we roll into budget season, we've got a plan before us with costs that we can make the investments that will help continue your mission to make it a safe system for drivers and riders. We appreciate all the work you've done. Kevin, I don't want to let this moment go without thanking you. Today's briefing by you and your commitment is again been demonstrated. We are going to miss you here. And we've already recognized you at a full council meeting, but just on behalf of the Transportation and Common Environment Committee, I want to thank you very much for your work on behalf of the 2 million residents of King County.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, members of the committee. It's been my pleasure.
Thank you.